step right up and get your tickets for another moment in gaming history. Hey guys, welcome back to your next moment in gaming history. What I have for you today is, in part, kind of a debate depending on how you want to identify it. You see, I want to talk about the first 3D game, and yes, I recall that we talked about the first FPS already, but there's a little bit of debate on which happened either far earlier or far later than you think, depending on how you approach it. And really, Maze Wars wasn't really officially released, so I don't think most people count it. So let's go ahead and dig into this and see what we can come up with. The reason this is a bit of a debate is it depends on what type of 3D you're talking about. So that end, let's sit down and talk about different ways that developers have approached 3D to determine which one we consider the most appropriate. You see, there's Pseudo 3D. This is the earliest form of 3D seen in games from Maze Wars, the first FPS that we've covered already on the show, to 3D Monster Maze, which you may not have heard of yet. In fact, one of the earliest examples commercially released of this type of game would be, in fact, 3D Monster Maze. This is likely one of the most official types of pseudo 3D games, and one of the earliest examples of survival horror, all at the same time, and was released in 1981. And no, you're not hearing things. In this game, the player is stuck in a maze that has a T-Rex in it that's hunting them. The player must avoid the T-Rex and escape the maze. The player gets points for each step while the T-Rex is actually hunting them, and for escaping the maze. If the player is too far from the T-Rex, his agitation level drops, and the player gains no points. The closer the player is to the T-Rex, the more urgent messages pop up to alert them of the dinosaur's proximity. It's a cool idea for a game, and really showcases just how long some of the survival horror concepts have actually been around. There's no getting around it though. This type of 3D would often be more of a 2D affair using sprite scaling and perspective to make it feel like you were in a 3-dimensional environment. As you turn, the sprites will shift and turn around you so that you're always front-facing whatever it is you're dealing with, but it has no real true depth to it. It's merely an optical illusion. I know what you're saying though. What does it matter? Some of the coolest games use this, just look at Doom. I mean, Doom. And I'm not arguing, those games are good and feel 3-dimensional, but they partially did it the way they did it because sprites looked better at the time, and not having to process a fully 3D image on screen at speed with the type of mayhem you'd have going on at say something like Doom would, well, make it easier to process and make it work on more hardware. However, this isn't the only type of 3D that developers have used. Let's stop and talk about vector graphics, more appropriately vector 3D. Now, vector graphics have been around for quite some time, and have been used to give people the image of 3D with almost the skeleton of 3 dimensions. Most vector graphics would remind most modern gamers of the kind of wire mesh used for 3D modeling in a current day and age, almost like a skeleton or rough out of what would become a 3D model. Some of the most well-known games in this genre of graphics are games like Asteroids, which is a simple, flat 2D shooter, Star Wars with its impressive wire grid graphics that help you feel like you are properly in the cockpit of an X-Wing. And the most well-known for pushing these types of games into 3D, Battlezone. Battlezone almost looked like something out of the movie Tron, with you facing down enemy tanks, super tanks, and even UFOs to a growing number of points. It's easy to see why many would consider this to be the birthplace of 3D, as the wire designs and perspective would make most kids of the 80s think of some futuristic 3D battlefield in some Hollywood movie. I mean, just look at this, it's absolutely stunning to look at. Now, let's finally talk about the one that most of you would probably recognize as the fully 3D game. This will be the first polygonal 3D game, iRobot. This was another game by Atari that was designed by Dave Thurier and Rusty Daw, released in 1984, and yeah, you heard that right. In this game, the player controls a robot called Unhappy Interface Robot 1984, who's a servant robot that's become self-aware and decides to rebel against Big Brother. You really can't make this stuff up. Well, I guess you can, it's a video game, but still. As the robot, you have to destroy the giant blinking eye of Big Brother. Are you serious right now? It's like Lord of the Rings meets Big Government for some reason. Look, basically you can't jump when Big Brother has his eye open, and you have to avoid hazards like birds, bombs, and flying sharks. Okay, this game makes no sense. However, it's actually pretty amazing for the time and a great use of polygonal 3D far, far earlier than most of us would have thought of. Because when I think polygonal 3D, first thing my mind comes to Mario 64, but I digress. So, which is the first? Well, I think I'm going to leave that up to you guys. What do you think of these type of 3D games? Which is your favorite? Which do you think really represents best the first 3D game? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with me. If you could, do me one more favor, please leave this video a like. I'd really appreciate it. And if you haven't, consider subscribing, it really helps my channel out. However, until next time, have a great rest of your day, and happy gaming.